us, when they stop the indigenous people of Hawaii from having their sacred sites, when they stop us, the people of People's Park, from having our sanctuary site. We're having a site for the people, built by the people, held by the people, and hopefully fought for by the people.
Of course, yeah.
And I was requested to mention a date, October 16th at City Hall. There's going to be a commemoration for Michael. October 15th or 16th. I'm not perfect. But please show up and say some words, and don't stop speaking until they recognize that this was state violence, that they killed our brother, our family member, and they have a right to exist. So I want to read The Second Generation by Mario Savio. I went to an ASUC meeting. I had about 2 minutes to speak, and I didn't know what to say to them. But I wanted them to know that there's people here who care. And so if I could, I would like to read The Second Generation. At his son Nadav's graduation from the Sidwell Friends School, Mario gave the major commencement speech on June 10, 1988. He took this occasion to rebut conservative critics of the New Left, most notably Alan Bloom, who in his 60s bashing book, published during the Reagan era, charged the student movement had severely damaged American higher education. Savio found that not only Bloom, but much of mainstream America, including his own father, lacked the open-mindedness necessary to assess judiciously the insights that came from the left. He voiced hope that the coming generation would be more open-minded and would move beyond the narrow intellectual horizons of Cold War America. This is Savio. I would like to begin by acknowledging those of you, especially the students, who have made it possible for me to speak to you here today. Perhaps thanks would be more gracious than mere acknowledgement, but I'm not at all sure how appropriate it would be to say thank you for this very stressful opportunity of speaking at the graduation of one's own son. Particularly so for me. Since someone calls Mr. Savio, I still must suppress the reflex to look around to see if my father is somewhere in the room. Parents in recent times have grown used to being judged frankly, if not harshly, by their children. A practice which my own generation has some hand in establishing as a dubious tradition. I rise quickly then at the opportunity to be judged in public by one's own son and his friends is, in the Italian proverb, to skip happily into the mouth of the wolf. You know, when I received this letter of invitation, I was genuinely surprised, actually shocked. The terror set in only when I sat down to write the speech. I tend to have a sort of facetious sense of humor, and so the first thing that popped into my head was that it was some sly stagmentation that my son had cooked up to ensure I attend his graduation. But surely, only very special circumstances could cause a parent to miss this graduation. For the pride and the inevitable sadness in saying goodbye to childhood are deeply felt by all. Not by the graduates only, but by the teachers and the parents as well. This, like this moment here, is an important moment. I was surprised, but also pleased by the invitation for another reason also. Some of you may have read the so-called Battle of the Books raging now according to the Sunday New York Times on American university campuses, and others may have read Professor Alan Bloom's bestseller, The Closing of the American Mind. Evidence in both cases that the impulse for deep reform or radical change, which we correctly associate with the 60s, is still very much a focus of controversy. In his chapter on the 60s, Professor Bloom writes, about the 60s, it is now fashionable to say that although there were indeed excesses, many good things resulted. But so far as universities are concerned, I know nothing positive coming from that period. It was an unmitigated disaster for them. I hear that good things were greater openness, less rigidity, freedom from authority, etc. But those have no content and express no view of what is wanted from the university education. Well, Professor Bloom's book is, as I said, a bestseller, and is rather well written, actually, displaying an impressive erudition. I recommend it to you as pre-college summer reading, but you can see that as one of Professor Bloom might credit with having made a modest personal contribution to the destruction of higher education in America, I could be pleasantly surprised by an invitation to address a graduation high school class, most if not all of whom will now be going on to those very colleges and universities. which I and my ilk have presumably left in shambles. I, of course, do not feel that any such great damage was done by the person of the period of the 60s, either to America or to American universities. On the contrary, and since it certainly is due to some fame or notoriety which I achieved in the era that you have invited me here as your commencement speaker, I know that you would feel cheated if I did not dwell upon what the time meant to me and what it might mean to you. When you get to college, you will be confronted, on one hand, by those young professors who were students during the 60s, now achieving tenure, whose presence the William Bennetts and the Blooms decry, and on the other hand, by Professor Bloom's conservative cohorts themselves, admonishingly, you will remain safely within the library's protective walls, lest premature contact with the world of causes and conflict result in the closing of your minds. In short, if you go to college at all, the question of your relationship to the generation of the 60s, to my generation, Mario Savio, is one you will find it very difficult to avoid. What, then, was so special about the 60s? And what is it like for me, a most apolitical son of an apolitical Italian immigrants, prior to my departure from college? What was the nature of the alteration within my mind and spirit when, like you now, I was preparing myself to move beyond the influence and control of teachers and my parents? Life in the 60s, even the late 50s, despite rock and roll, was both most silent and most stark than what you have known. There used to test explode nuclear weapons in the open air and broadcast the results on TV screens for the world to see. America was undisputed top rooster in those days, and American policymakers evidently hoped to intimidate the Russians. The unintended outcome was to terrify the children of the United States. Frankly, I was never deeply impressed by the belief some hold that human beings would never use those weapons in a real war.